The United Arab Emirates has been a steadfast ally of the United States in the Middle East since the 1980s. There's been significant military cooperation between both countries, with the US selling millions of dollars of military equipment over the years. This includes F-16 fighter jets, Apache attack helicopters, and even Patriot missiles. But then something happened in 2018. The UAE was one of the visiting dignitary countries at the International Maritime Defense Show in St. Petersburg in Russia. The UAE Navy expressed interest in purchasing Russian-made missile systems. After negotiations which went on for a few months, the two countries signed a contract where the UAE purchased the Russian-made Club S missile system. This deal was worth over $700 million. The purchase of the Club S missile system was a significant moment in UAE-Russia military cooperation. It was the first time that the Emirates had purchased weapons directly from Russia. The deal also showed the willingness of the UAE to diversify its sources of weapons procurement and not rely solely on the United States. Cut to today, Western countries are pushing the United Arab Emirates to halt exports of critical goods to Russia. Western officials say they have reason to believe that the UAE is becoming a conduit for Vladimir Putin to procure military components to sustain his war against Ukraine. Officials from the United States, the European Union, and the UK were in recent weeks visiting the wealthy Gulf state. In meetings that they have had with their UAE counterparts, they have spelt out exactly what trade restrictions they want put in place. They are also pressing the UAE to clamp down on suspected sanctions busting, which in other words means that we know that the UAE is being used as a transit for Putin to fuel this war, and we want it to stop now. On Crux Decode, is the UAE becoming a shipment hub for Putin's war machine? How are they managing to do this, subverting the stringent sanctions regime that's been put in place since this war began? And has the UAE's neutral status been threatened because of this? Will ties between America and the Emirates be soured because of the Ukraine war? The US government is worried that the UAE is becoming a hub for shipment of electronics that can be repurposed for Russia's war effort. One particular concern is so-called re-exporting, where goods are routed through the UAE to sidestep restrictions. James O'Brien, who's the head of the US Office of Sanctions Coordination, and his EU counterpart David O'Sullivan, along with David Reed, the director of the UK Sanctions Directorate, went to the UAE last month to press their case. Their main request was to stop the re-exports and to acknowledge that these re-exports are problematic. They did not get a firm reply from the Emiratis, but they were given to understand that the pressure is being piled on. Exports of electronic parts from the UAE to Russia jumped more than sevenfold last year to almost $283 million. Electronic parts are now the largest type of product that are being shipped from the UAE to Russia. The UAE had exported 15 times more microchips to Russia in 2022 than in 2021. Trade in these microchip products jumped to $24.5 million last year from just $1.6 million in 2021. The Gulf country also exported over 150 drones to Russia last year, worth almost $600,000. The discussions with the UAE come even as Western allies are shifting their focus from unleashing fresh rounds of sanctions to tightening enforcement as well as encouraging private sector compliance. The Financial Times reported last month that Western countries had picked up unusual spikes in Russia's trade with some states. The report did not specify which those countries were which were seeing these spikes in trade with Russia, but America and its allies are closely watching the UAE, Turkey, as well as countries in Central Asia. The UAE is also seen as a favored destination for wealthy Russians who are seeking to park their assets. US officials want to underline the potential consequences for businesses involved in facilitating the flow of goods that can be used by the Russian military. Now, part of the message for the private sector is that in any of these countries, anyone who's trading in these goods are now subject to sanctions because some of these goods can show up on the battlefield. The UAE positions itself as a neutral regional power, balancing its very close security and historical ties with Western powers, with increasingly close ties as well as military and economic ties with countries like Russia and China. Dubai has long been the re-export hub of the Middle East. The Jebel Ali port remains one of the world's largest transshipment zones. In an attempt to try and tighten enforcement on such export hubs, the EU introduced new measures late last year, enabling it to sanction individuals who help European companies evade sanctions. Among Europe's requests is for improved information on what the UAE actually exports to Russia. There have been complaints about a lack of visibility there. But UAE officials counter this claim. One Emirati official was quoted as saying that the UAE recognizes its critical role in safeguarding the integrity of the global financial system. This is a responsibility that the UAE takes very seriously and has clear and robust processes to deal with sanctioned entities. But it's not just the UAE. American officials are also complaining that they are seeing similar spikes with China and with Turkey. In fact, that prompted Antony Blinken to warn China's top diplomat Wang Yi publicly against providing lethal aid to the Russian military. It's a message that he conveyed to his Turkish counterparts as well when he was there on a visit just last month. American officials also say that the US and its partners would act with various economic tools if countries were unwilling to stamp out sanctions evasion. Brian Nelson, the US Treasury's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, also visited the UAE last month. Tens of thousands of Russians have moved to the UAE, opening companies and buying properties in commercial as well as tourist destinations in the Gulf. This influx has raised concerns in Western capitals that some of these could be masking illegal activities of Putin's oligarchs. Remember, many of these multi-millionaires have been barraged by the sanctions regime since this war began. The UAE, which is an approved license for the Russian bank MTS, is now saying it's studying some of these options after the bank, one of the largest in the country, MTS, was hit by sanctions both by the US and by the UK last month. One potential area which could complicate ties further is the UAE's own changing dynamics within the Gulf region, ties warming up with Israel because of the Abraham Accords, and of course ties souring with Iran because of its ongoing and continuing nuclear program, as well as other tensions that we're seeing in the wider region. One thing is very, very clear, that America needs to tell one of its long-standing partners in the Middle East that it cannot use itself as some kind of a transit or conduit hub for fueling Putin's war effort. After all, the kind of unity that the Western world was hoping, unified action against Russia, we haven't quite seen that kind outside of both continental United States and also outside of continental Europe. The global South, most developing countries, and that includes those in the Gulf region, have preferred to sit out most of the votes at the UNGA and the United Nations Security Council, and that has been the case with the UAE as well. It has skipped many votes, both in the UNGA and in the UNSC, any which would have condemned Russia's actions.